Coming up on Levin TV, China prepares for war while America sleeps. And it all starts now.
This is where freedom rings.
If you believe in America, if you believe in the Constitution empowers us. It's a new day. America's back. America's back, and America's going to get strong again. We're going to defend America, and we're going to defend our interests.
Liberty's voice, Levin TV.
Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Levin TV on blazetv.com. You know, we're distracted a lot in this country with a pusillanimous press and a Speaker of the House who has become America's fascist, as far as I'm concerned. We spend a lot of time bickering over very stupid things. And the reality is there are things going on in this world that threaten us and threaten our future. The press, of course, should be focusing on these things rather than stirring the pot and cheerleading for the left, which is undermining our president, quite frankly, undermining our country. We're going to spend today's show focused on one of those issues that the alternative media, we'll call them the alternative media, does not focus on. That is cable, network, and satellite TV. Here on Levin TV, I want to spend some time, most of this program, discussing with you a grave threat that's taken place. We've talked on this program in the past about the ability of foreign countries, enemies, to knock out our electrical grid, which would be a disaster for this country in every respect. I have not seen a special or a documentary on this on CNN, MSNBC, or anywhere else. It is a grave threat to this country. The Chinese and the Russians are on the move with satellite technology aimed at taking out our satellites and everything that comes with them. And they are well advanced. And during the course of the Obama administration, President Obama killed our R&D and advances in this area, where President Trump is trying to rebuild them and create what he calls the Space Force. Now I'm going to explain to you why through this article at the Free Beacon written by Bill Gertz. Bill Gertz has been writing about national security and foreign policy for decades. He is, to me, among a handful of serious journalists and experts in this field. So when Bill Gertz writes, we really ought to pay attention. And the Free Beacon is an excellent website, and it is ignored by the mainstream media, but it is not ignored by us. So get ready for this. This is going to be shocking, and it's crucially important that you hear about it. Pentagon, Chinese military units training with ASAT missiles. Have you heard of any of this? Do you know what any of this is? Unless you watch this program or read the Free Beacon, my guess is no. So it's up to me to push it out into the public realm. Chinese military forces have developed multiple units armed with anti-satellite, that's ASAT, anti-satellite missiles that can destroy scores of American satellites, according to a Pentagon intelligence report. The new report by the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, known as NASIC, revealed the People's Liberation Army units have begun training with the satellite-killing missiles. The report warns that China, along with Russia, has developed an array of space arms designed to challenge U.S. space superiority. The report was made public last month. Now understand this, and I'll say it first. China is on a war footing. The other day, China announced that it was cutting its army in half, its ground forces, and taking those resources and much of the personnel and applying them to the Navy and Air Force. That's for us, because China doesn't really have any land threat, not from Russia. India is too far behind militarily, although India is trying to pick up now, but China's way ahead. And we had 8 years of a president in Obama who was an appeaser, who was passive, who was anti-military, and in many ways anti-American. And that has consequences. That has consequences. The Chinese are leapfrogging us now, stealing our technology and leapfrogging us. The report for the first time reveals that Chinese military units already are conducting training for space attacks with anti-satellite missiles. Russia also is developing a new anti-satellite missile, the report said. These missiles can destroy U.S. and allied space systems in low Earth orbit, making intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and communication satellites vulnerable, the report says.
The Air Force operates 6 constellations and 12 satellite systems regarded as vital to national security. They provide communications, command and control, missile warning, nuclear detonation detection, weather, and GPS for the world. You may remember my interview with Michael Pillsbury on Fox a few months ago, where he said he was involved in various scenarios if there were a war between the United States and China. If it's a conventional war right now, we will win barely. But if China were able to do what China is aiming to do, which is to knock out our eyes and our ability to know what's taking place, then under his scenario, China wins. That's what China's doing. Multiple attack options: cyber, electronic, or directed energy weapons, anti-satellite missiles, or space-based weapons enable potential adversaries to achieve a range of damaging effects. This is an official report by our government. The missile type and PLA units, the Red Chinese military, engaged in ASAT training were not identified. However, defense officials have said with as few as 24 ASAT missile strikes, 24, China could cause major disruptions in U.S. military operations that are heavily dependent on satellites for communications, intelligence, and precision guidance for missiles and bombs. The ASAT missile training followed congressional testimony in February from Director of National Intelligence Daniel Coats, that would have been of last year, who said China's destructive anti-satellite weaponry would probably reach initial operational capacity in the next few years. Coats also mentioned China had formed military units that carried out initial operational training with ground-launched ASAT missiles. Now let's just stop here. Now do you understand what I said at the beginning of the program? While we fiddle, Rome could burn. While we are involved in press-generated, left-wing generated, Democrat-generated, stupid side issues, where they're trying at all costs to push this president out of office, our enemies are on the rise, particularly China and Russia, and they're on the move. And one of the guests we're going to have soon on my Fox show is General John Keane, a retired 4-star general. You've seen him before, but you're never going to see him interviewed the way I'm going to interview him for a full hour. That's to come. I haven't done it yet, but that's to come. Rick Fisher, a China military expert, said the 25-page NASIC report, Competing in Space, is important U.S. government confirmation that the PLA, remember China's Red Guard Army, has progressed from a demonstrated ASAT weapon in January 2007 to multiple units equipped with ASAT missiles. I'm telling you, this is serious stuff. Well, the PLA now has actual units of ASAT weapons targeting critical American military and civilian space assets. The United States does not have a similar organized counterspace capacity, he said. We're basically disarmed in the face of an active Chinese military space capability. I just think this is incredible. Fisher blamed the Obama administration and former President Barack Obama, who ideologically opposed the development of U.S. military space capabilities. Can you imagine if Hillary Clinton won the election? We'd be further behind. Can you imagine if this president, Trump, is defeated by one of these radical leftists? I mean, the threats that are posed to this country, to your children and your grandchildren, are just incredible. America and its allies are very fortunate, he says, that President Trump has decided that the U.S. military requires a new space force, he said. This is not an offensive or destabilizing initiative. It is now a necessary and defensive capability that is urgently required by the United States, much like the wall. That is a defensive capability. A DIA, or Defense Intelligence Agency, report on Chinese military power made public last week said China has not publicly acknowledged the existence of any new programs since a 2007 missile strike against an orbiting weather satellite. The NASIC report is the first time the Pentagon has described in detail how a future conflict would be carried out in space. Additionally, the report said the number of space satellites is growing rapidly, from 100 several years ago to 300 today, Remember, we have none of these kill satellites, making the domain congested and increasing the risks of collision. Both China and Russia are developing new space arms to achieve military goals. At the same time, Beijing and Moscow are promoting a ban on space weapons in an apparent bid to slow or prevent the United States from matching their space warfare systems, because they know about our media and they know about the left. They monitor them all the time. And they have no better allies than the Democrat Party and CNN and MSNBC and all the rest of them. So they figure, here, we'll pretend we're negotiating to keep weapons out of space. We'll make it the United States, and Trump especially, are trying to weaponize space. You've even heard that phrase. Meanwhile, they've already been weaponizing space. Despite publicly insisting that space is a peaceful domain, these competitors, Russia and China, are in continuing development of several anti-satellite weapons, the report said. China and Russia remain the most capable space warfare states, but other nations also are expected to join the arms race in space by building systems to wage war against American satellites. That would be like Iran, North Korea, and so forth. Russia's new asset was not identified, anti-satellite missiles. Other officials have it as the Nodal, suspected in a flight test in September. Through military reforms, China and Russia have organized new military forces devoted to the employment of space and counter-space capabilities and regularly integrate them into military exercises. Counter-space is the military's term for space warfare operations and weaponry. Anti-U.S. governments of both China and Russia continue to develop, test, and proliferate sophisticated anti-satellite weapons to hold U.S. and allied space assets at risk, the report said. You know, the left loves government reports and embraces them all the time, but isn't it funny, this report does not get attention? It's really outrageous. Directed energy weapons can produce temporary and permanent damage to satellites through focused radio frequency or laser beams. Reversible effects include temporarily blinding optical sensors, the report says. Non-reversible effects include permanently damaging or destroying sensors or other satellite components. Both China and Russia intend to field counter-space directed energy weapons, laser weapons. Chinese defense research over the past 2 decades has studied several types of directed energy space weapons, and Russia is reportedly building an airborne laser that can be used to attack space-based missile defense sensors. That is, take out our Patriot defense missiles. This is incredible. The Pentagon was building its own anti-missile airborne laser into a Boeing 747, but the program was canceled by the Obama administration. Reduced launch costs and proliferation of space systems will drive more countries to integrate space weapons into their militaries, the report warned. The terrorists also could use space to support attacks using intelligence, communications, and navigation space systems. Among the emerging space-based anti-satellite threats, the report identified a variety of arms. They include space-based interceptors to crash into satellites, complex space robots capable of grabbing or crushing satellites by maneuvering close to them, and jammers, lasers, chemical sprayers, and microwave weapons. I mean, they are way ahead, and these are really quite devastating. Some states are developing sophisticated orbiting technologies for satellite maintenance and debris removal that could also be used to damage satellites covertly. So they're sending satellites up there that are said to have civilian purposes or maintenance purposes that are in disguise attack satellites. To support both military and civilian use, China has a fleet of 120 remote sensing and reconnaissance satellites, half operated by the People's Liberation Army. The satellites allow the PLA to spy on regional rivals like India and Japan, and flashpoints in Korea, Taiwan, and the East and South China Sea. For communications, China is developing satellite systems for communications, including the world's first quantum communications satellite, with 3 others planned. Quantum communications are hardened against jamming or interception. They're building offensive attack satellites, defensive satellites, and satellites protected from potential attack satellites that we may build. What are we building? Nothing. Obama killed the whole program. Trump is trying to create the Space Force, and he's going to be blocked, you watch it, by Nancy Pelosi and the liberal Democrats. So really, who's in the pocket of the Russians, and I might add the Chinese? Donald Trump or the Democrats? Both China and Russia also deployed navigation satellites to reduce reliance on the American Global Positioning System. The satellites are used for guiding precision weapons. Move down here. The loss of GPS, like in your own car, the loss of GPS would impact police, firefighters, and paramedics. What they're saying is they can take out our GPS satellites and prevent rapid response to emergencies right here in the United States. News, long-distance telephone, satellite television, and internet service also would be unavailable. Retail stores and gas stations would be unable to communicate with banks to handle purchases and critical services, could be affected by weapons targeting our space services. And I will add, they can attack the electrical grid. Attack the electrical grid with crewed satellites. And so these people are not playing games. They're playing for keeps. On space attacks, the report warned that a number of adversaries are building and proliferating a number of types of weapons that can disrupt or deny space services. Now, let's take a look at our graphic here, please. This is just a basic graphic that shows there's a satellite. These are the link systems: user segment, ground segment. Space segment: command intrusion, payload control, denial of service, malware, user segment. Spoofing, denial of service, malware, link segment. Command intrusion, spoofing, replay, ground segment. Hacking, hijacking, malware. They're showing we have a ground communication, a user segment, a space segment, and all are easily attacked, are vulnerable to what the Chinese and the Russians are building. Jamming global navigation and communication satellites used for command and control in naval, ground, and air forces, including drones. Weapons designed to target intelligence satellites would be designed to prevent locating, monitoring, and tracking enemy targets, like mobile missiles. Lasers can temporarily blind imagery satellites and other strategic sensors. Anti-satellite missiles can be used to shoot down our satellites, like the Chinese missile test in 2007 that destroyed an orbiting weather satellite that created debris that will threaten other satellites for decades. China and Russia are using orbiting robot satellites that conduct sophisticated maneuvering near other satellites as part of the space warfare capabilities. I'm just summarizing. Adversaries plan to conduct physical attacks on satellite ground stations, right there, and infrastructure supporting space operations. Cyber attacks also can be carried out against satellites and support infrastructure. The networks used to direct satellites and distribute their data are vulnerable to cyber attacks, and electronic jamming can be used to disrupt both uplink and downlink signals. Uplink jamming is aimed at signals going up to a satellite and must operate at the same radio frequency, while downlink jamming targets blocking signals coming down to the ground station. China and Russia consider both offensive cyber capabilities and electronic warfare as key assets for maintaining military advantage, the report said. As a result, both countries are researching and developing cyber capabilities and modernizing electronic warfare assets. What are we doing? Nothing. Thank you, Obama. That's why I guess he got his Nobel Peace Prize. China and Russia are also using ground and space-based sensors to search the skies for foreign satellites. The sensors are first in a sequence of steps that a potential adversary will use to target satellites, launch counter-space weapons, and assess the effectiveness of an attack, the report said. The space surveillance can also be used by militaries for denial and deception to hide sensitive military capabilities or ground operations. Monitoring space threats is difficult for U.S. intelligence because adversaries are using dual-use civilian military space systems that can appear benign but have hidden military and warfighting systems, such as robotic armed satellites. So you can send a weather satellite up there, or claim to, or maybe it looks like it, but then it has this robotic arm or other devices or mechanisms that are used to attack satellites and so forth. China has conducted tests of 3 small satellites, including one with a robotic arm capable of grabbing nearby satellites. Russia's also testing small maneuvering satellites. Now, this should cause you a great deal of concern, because one of the reasons our military has been superior to other militaries is, of course, our training and that, but our intelligence, the leap in intelligence. You know, if Hitler had developed the atomic bomb, and he was working on it before we did, it could have changed the entire outcome of the war. He was also working on missiles capable of delivering heavy payloads. Came very, very close to it. Again, that could have changed the outcome of the war too. It's one of the reasons at the end of the war, or near the end of the war and at the end of the war, US military intelligence and Russian intelligence were rushing into Germany to grab the various scientists, as we did, von Braun being one of them. And he was key to our satellite system, our Saturn system, I should say, our rocket system. This is a grave problem for the United States, because I don't believe we have all the leaders in place to deal with this. When you look at a Nancy Pelosi and this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which the media keep promoting, when you look at some of the Republicans even, we don't even discuss these things, they're not promoted. When you look at the individuals in the media, many of them come out of the 1970s, 1980s. They're not quite familiar with the Cold War. They view people like me and others as war hawks, as scaremongers. It's much more fun, and it's better for their ratings if they're just on an attack Trump, attack Trump, attack Trump, and focus on domestic politics and domestic economics. They're very, very important, but not to the exclusion of everything else. If we had a working press that was fundamentally committed to informing the American people, and that's the purpose of freedom of the press, this could be more easily addressed. The Chinese and the Russians are also working on hypersonic aircraft and missiles. Now, hypersonic means we can't catch them with the missiles we have right now. So we can't defend our cities even with our missile defense system. I'm telling you, we have the technological ability to outpace these people and their countries, but we're sitting on it. It just is, to watch this, you know, when you're somebody like me who spends 3 hours on the radio, 45 minutes here, maybe an hour here, and by the way, it takes us 3 hours to prepare a program. It takes me, it takes the staff and crew here, you know, all day, but doing this program, the Fox program, writing books, when you see the decline of the Republic, when you see the decline of our politics, when you see the internal balkanization, we're at each other's throats, so we don't even recognize the growing threat from these enemies abroad, and we're going to be caught off guard. It is incredibly troubling. I'd say I'd pull out my hair, but I've got nothing to pull out. This is a big, big problem. Our focus is not right. Our priorities are not right as a society. Instead, story after story, you can't use pronouns. Story after story, who can use the men's room and the girls' room? Story after story, fake stories about these Catholic kids on the mall. It's just day in and day out. And the trashing of Trump. This is the news right here. So these hypersonic weapons that they're working on, 6 times the speed of sound. We have nothing like that. There's some question about whether they've perfected these weapons yet, but that doesn't matter. They're working on it. They're stealing our technology, using it against us, and they are working on it. Let's take a look at this from the South China Morning Post. Go. what they do is they launch them into or towards space, and they go into space. And they're so fast, we can't catch them. And then the challenge is, of course, they have to be able to target them, but they're getting there. They're moving very, very fast. We're not even in the ball game. We're not even in the satellite warfare ball game. The President of the United States has obviously been briefed on this. So the President of the United States has called for this Space Force, breaking it off from the Air Force. So we need to focus on space. We need to get our best experts involved. We need to get our companies involved with R&D. This is the area where the federal government has a role, you know, redistributing wealth, going after billionaires and all that. That's their game. It must be defeated. But we need to look over our shoulder. When you look over our shoulder, you see this, and it's a big deal. I hope this program, I hope you found it helpful and important. And I hope you'll have family and friends sit around and play it for them too. Because this is something that's very important. And as far as I know, this is the only television program that's addressing it at all. And I want to thank the Free Beacon and Bill Gertz for providing us with this incredible public service. Having gone through that government report, which has not even been discussed on any cable network or show that I'm aware of, any network news program that I'm aware of, none. And you think it would be, because this is the coming war with China and potentially Russia. That's no joke. This is the coming war. And when they think they can beat us, when they think they've outdeveloped us, that's when the provocations begin. Just look at the South China Sea. Look what's taking place. Look at Russia. What are we doing in Syria? Russia just warned the Israelis, stop attacking the Iranians, as it builds alliances with Turkey, Iran, and of course it has its puppet state, Syria, because they know what travels through the Mediterranean Sea. They know that that is a geopolitical must for them. And so in the meantime, we're not focused on any of it as a nation. Anyway, that's it.